Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for spending the next 30 minutes with us. I am Lisa March. I'm the Director of Marketing here at LTI, and I am thrilled to have with us Jen Carson and Andy McDonough, who are both members of our AAPPL Educators Panel. If you're not familiar with the Educators Panel, we have partnered with the best and brightest across world language educators in the nation to create the Educators Panel. And what we hope to do with this group is to collaborate, inspire, mentor, and share knowledge with fellow educators who are either using LTI and ACTFL assessments or examining and considering ways in which to incorporate ACTFL tests into their language programs. So with that, I'd like to again welcome you to the LTI sponsored webinar, and our moderator today is Jen Carson, and Jen comes to us as the immediate past president for NADSFL and the coordinator of K-12 World Languages in Virginia Beach City Public Schools. Jen will be moderating our session today, and Andy McDonough comes to us with 10 years of experience at the Chillicothe Schools in Ohio, where he teaches 8th through 12th grade French, and is a prolific writer on topics of world languages. So you'll want to check out Andy's blog, and also see Andy at Central States, where he will be presenting with Andrew Bowen, our AAPPL specialist, later this week. So with that, Jen, I am going to turn it over to you.
Hi, Andy. It's Jen. I'm really eager to speak with you today. I'm a huge proponent of performance tasks, and I love the way the AAPPL mimics how we seek to instruct and assess in a real life relevant way. And I was reading your blog, and you talked about this shift to a proficiency-based instruction, and how you use the AAPPL to confirm that your students were communicating so much better with this new method. And I'd really love for you to share your experience today, because I find it inspirational.
Okay, well, hi, Jen. Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks for being here. Yeah, so my school, my program, my district has made this huge change over the past 5 years. We went from being a class that was, and being a program and being a district that was very traditional. We had our textbooks, we had our our vocab lists, and we had our grammar topics that we were going to cover every 9 weeks and semester and so forth. And, we had our system and we were good with that. And then Ohio, where I teach, released its new standards in about 2013, 2014. And nothing that we were doing made sense with the new standards because, props to Ohio, they were proficiency-based standards. And that's not what we were doing at my school. So one of the things that we found that we really needed to change was the way we were testing. We knew our tests were only covering grammar and vocab, and that's not what they wanted anymore in Ohio. So we kept experimenting with different types of tests.
And so the kinds of tests you were using, were the ones from the textbooks initially, or were you developing your own, or were you looking outside to external testing?
So initially we were still basically looking at our own textbooks, and then we offer an AP program here. And that's kind of a whole other story as well. But yeah, so we had been using our really textbooky tests. And once Ohio released its standards, they did a really great thing by releasing a model curriculum with it. And with it, they did IPAs. And as I started implementing those IPAs, I found that, well, I implemented the IPAs without changing my style of teaching. So what I found was that these performance and proficiency-based tests were far better tests than what I had been giving, but my kids weren't able to do them. They were entirely freezing, particularly during the interpersonal part.
Right, so that was your weak part, was the interpersonal speaking. And so how did you ramp that up so you could match, align how you were testing with how you were instructing?
Right. So what we had to do next was, we had to look at how we were actually teaching. We saw along with those new standards that the state was wanting 90% target language, and none of us knew how to do that. When you're teaching about, the past tense or the passive voice, it's really tough to stay in the target language and talk about grammar technicalities. So we realized that we needed to reconsider everything. So we did a lot of professional development. We went to workshops, our state conference, and we came across this methodology called organic world language, which was kind of a game changer for us. It's 100% target language. It's proficiency focused, which tied in really well to the IPAs, and it really shook up our program.
Are you finding it more fun to teach now?
Oh, so much more fun. Our programs have gotten bigger. We're retaining more throughout the levels. It's such a good. It's been a great system for us.
So when you made this choice to use the Apple, um, how did you make that selection of using the Apple rather than other things that are
Right.
available?
So yeah, we knew that we were supposed to use these proficiency-based methodologies, right? We know that we're supposed to assess them. I have this great IPA model through Ohio. The problem is every rubric seemed like it was different, and every evaluator seemed like they were evaluating rubrics differently. So as we embraced this new style of teaching, we realized that we didn't have a common way of assessing its results. And deep down, we believed that the methodology was working. We saw our students speaking more, better, writing more and better. But we really had no objective way of looking at that. And we realized that as long as we were just giving our own teacher-based tests, we were essentially going to only give the scores that we wanted to see. We unintentionally or not, and usually unintentionally, we're biased. And the teachers in my district who held to a far more traditional model of teaching as well,
Mhm.
it became a little bit competitive. So we knew that we needed some kind of outside assessment to look at this. As I said earlier, we're an AP school.
Mhm.
Um, but we're also a high poverty district, and not many kids take AP. It's too expensive. It's not something a lot of our students do. And the other problem that I found with AP and so many of the other tests is that it is, in addition to being expensive, it doesn't really assess proficiency. It assesses depth of knowledge on certain topics, and proficiency is part of it. I have this graphic since I'm
Yeah.
so uh, technology inclined, which I am not. That kind of shows like what we were dealing with when we looked at the other assessments. So I'm gonna,
Okay, I'd
uh,
love to see that.
yeah. Well, like I said, my technology use is excellent. So let me get that up for you right now. Are you seeing it?
Yes, now I see it.
Okay. So yeah, this is what we really found with all of the other tests that we looked at, is that on one end, they did to some degree measure what students can do with the language. AP does that. Textbook tests do that. To some degree or another, there is a proficiency element to it, but it's always counterbalanced by a lot of different things. The textbook tests throw in a ton of mechanics, and you know even just as traditional teachers, we learned to judge accent marks, spelling, pronunciation, those small mechanical things. Like I said, with AP in particular, it was balanced with depth of knowledge of certain topics. If you didn't understand one question, you might not be able to get any points on the entire essay, even if you can write beautifully
Right.
about a variety of other topics.
Mhm.
Um, and we also noticed that there was a really heavy reliance on the interpretive mode. Again, I go back to AP, where the presentational writing depends heavily on your ability to analyze two to three authentic resources.
Yep.
Um, so, while those tests do certainly assess to some degree what a student can do with the language, like I said, it is so counterbalanced. Sorry if I make you seasick here.
No.
Um, it is so counterbalanced by all of these things that don't really have anything to do with proficiency. And then we started looking at what else was out there. Uh, and this was encouraged a lot by our state's move to the seal of biliteracy.
Mhm.
We knew that AP was one way to earn the seal, but like I said, our students weren't taking AP. They didn't like AP, and we weren't having a lot of success with AP. Um, so we wanted to find a test that, wasn't cheating, that was still telling what they could do with language, but only told what they could do with language. Um, and what we found were two tests, actually,
Mhm.
that asked students to understand and asked students to participate in conversations and then asked students to write.
Mhm.
And of those two tests, only one of them is very closely tied with ACTFL, and that's the Apple test. So we went with Apple. That's how we decided to choose that one.
So you relied on the name of ACTFL, knowing that the world language field really did respect this particular test.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, I'm in a department where we're a little bit competitive about and likely biased in terms of how we assess.
Mhm.
Um, Having ACTFL, having that name there is authoritative. We know for sure that we are getting the best raters, that we're getting the most information out of the results.
And it saves you time too, because now you would in the past either be rating your own students or rating your colleagues' students, and now somebody else is doing it.
Absolutely. It is tons. It saves a ton of time. It's as you can see, I struggle technologically, but even though it's a tech-based test, it was so time freeing to use. And again, the results were so much better than results that I could have, or than data that I could have manufactured on my own.
Wow. And what about the administration of the test? How did you set it up? Did the kids pay themselves? Was it difficult to get the devices for them to, the
Right. So
headphones and everything?
yeah. So my school is a one-to-one school with
Okay.
Chromebooks, and so we were fortunate enough to have that in place already, and our bandwidth was good, and all of that. Um, and we had about one set of headphones per student, and it was relatively easy to share. We kind of grouped students into two groups, and one of them was using the microphones for the speaking, while the other group was on other parts of the test. And then during a break, we switched them all over. But we actually
Pretty
did test.
practical.
I'm sorry.
That was really practical.
It was, yeah. We were testing about 200 students at the same time, and it was our first time doing it. So, yeah, there was a good deal of planning that went into it.
So, were they all a certain level in their class? Was it all level 3 students and above?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because that actually I'll answer that question in a minute, but it
Okay.
reminded me of something else that we just loved using. So compared to other tests like the AP that
Yeah.
you can only use at the end of a student's course or at the end of the program, and then you don't get the results from AP back until after these students have usually graduated.
Mhm.
Um, with Apple, you can test any level. You can test your level ones, and obviously they're not going to score in the advanced range, or most likely won't, but
Mhm.
you're still going to get a feel for how much they've grown, where they're going, what they can do to get there. um, so that's one thing, and that's one reason we chose the Apple, is you can test
Mhm.
any student with it at any level. So we chose to test a few classes in particular, and it was based off of a couple questions that we
Mhm.
particularly had about our district. And again, I'm going to make you a little seasick here,
No, it's
um,
great.
because we had some questions that we really needed answered. uh, and I will find these questions. Well, anyway, here's a little bit more about our test day. We did do this well, and we found them. So yeah, here were the questions that we had.
Okay.
We wanted to know, as the state standards were asking us, can you still see my screen? I'm sorry.
Yes, yes.
Okay. As the state standards wanted level 3 to be reaching intermediate low at the end of their third year, we really didn't know if they were getting there or not. Personally, I was convinced they were all stuck at novice high. So we wanted to test that. Were our students really getting to intermediate low by the end of level 3? So level 3 was a natural place to test. And then in level 4 and beyond, we wanted to know, are they getting beyond intermediate low? Because I have this really sick feeling that maybe even they were still stuck at novice high. So
Yes.
we wanted to see what everyone else was doing. So the people who should be in the intermediate range, were they really hitting intermediate? And then the final question we had was, is this OWL methodology that most of the teachers in my district had embraced an effective methodology? So because of that, we tested all the languages. Some of them use OWL, some don't, some use a mix. And we tested level 3 and above.
And was that nerve-wracking, thinking that, well, maybe it could show that this methodology that I'm really relying upon is not successful?
It absolutely could have done that. We were nervous about it, especially with the presentational writing. We kind of had expectations that since OWL is a really conversational methodology, that my students were going to outperform their non-OWL counterparts in interpersonal speaking and listening, but they were going to underperform, particularly on the writing and the reading. So I was prepared to have to justify, a more progressive proficiency-based methodology to my traditionalists in my department. And this was a risk for sure.
And so tell me, what did the data show?
I am so glad you asked. In fact, I was ready for that. So here's what we found at level 3. The red line that you see, that represents what the Ohio Department of Education thinks students should achieve. So for this graph, that red line is intermediate low. The blue line is students who they were the French students, they were my students, who had been in OWL for their entire career, for their entire 3 semesters of French. And as we can see, in all sections, they outperformed the expectations. So I was convinced that they were stuck in novice high. In most sections, they were intermediate mid, which was mind-blowing, right?
And is that the threshold for the biliteracy seal in your state?
Intermediate high is the threshold in my state. But these are students in their 3rd semester. This is only French 3. Many of these students are freshmen. So, and then, we look at this kind of orange line. These are the students who had some OWL, but a lot of traditional mix. And you can see that they were, in some areas they were right at the line, and some they were a little below the line. But, this answered one of our essential questions: is this methodology effective? And what's great about this is we had no other way of measuring this. AP was not scoring kids like this. It wasn't scoring them in a way that related to proficiency. So this was the first time we'd ever gotten real data that was saying, yes, your students are hitting intermediate low.
And what about the information you received when they received the score, but the rubric with what they did well and how they would need to proceed to move up a sub-level?
Right. So the feedback that Apple gives you is, I wish I should have put a picture of this on here, but I know that you can find a picture of it on the Apple website. They give an example score report. It gives their score in each of the 4 modes: the interpersonal listening and speaking, the presentational writing, interpretive listening, and interpretive reading. And it also explains the rubric, so what each of those means. And then not only does it say what each of those scores mean, but it also tells you what they should be working on and focusing on to advance to the next level. So the feedback it's not only descriptive, it's prescriptive as well.
Oh, I love it because that
Right.
really helps with student goal setting.
Absolutely, it does. And a bonus is the rubrics that they use are
Mhm.
available on the Apple website for free. I use them all year long. They're the only rubrics I use. So every task they do for me, they get an Apple score for, and they know what it means. They know how to advance to the next level. It's a great setup. It's really teacher and classroom friendly.
I love it. So tell me what the rest of your students did.
Okay, so yeah, that's my level threes, and that's kind of the owl versus
Mhm.
non-owl, and they were so thrilled with themselves, and I was thrilled for them. Um, just to clarify, this says level five, but last year we were on semesters, so you could kind of, if you're in a year-long program, these are what you would more consider a year four,
Okay.
if you're year-long. And what we see is again the ODE threshold, which they would want intermediate mid for this course. And you can see that the blue line again, which has been OWL all throughout,
Mhm.
is far surpassing those. And again, these are kids that I was certain were stuck at novice high, maybe intermediate low. Um, excuse me. And they're not. They all
Clearly not.
surpassed
Yeah.
intermediate mid. And the other thing that we noticed too is at these upper levels,
Mhm.
the Spanish students start receiving a different kind of methodology. They start getting OWL full time at these upper levels. So we were able to see that, whereas Spanish was kind of lagging behind in those earlier levels, they
Mhm.
caught up really fast when they were given a proficiency-based methodology. They made a lot of improvement really quickly.
Did this persuade your colleagues who were more traditional to switch how they were teaching?
Um, that's a long conversation to have with your
Okay.
department members, and I find that in my department, change doesn't happen overnight. um,
Yeah.
and if in other departments it does, that's great. But this has certainly been a conversation piece, and this has been something that we've been able to take to administration,
Mhm.
um, and defend, because you never know who your next principal is going to be. You never know who your next superintendent might be, and you might have to justify a progressive methodology. They might want you to give more worksheets, more direct grammar explanations. They might not trust you to be the expert in the room. So to have this data to be like, no, really, this works. This is why we're
Mhm.
doing this. It's invaluable to teachers who believe in proficiency.
Oh, I love it.
Level seven, and you can see the trend. Um, that red line finally passes us, but that red line is advanced. Or sorry, no, the red line is intermediate high.
Okay.
So that's the I4 that you're seeing there, or intermediate high. And yes, it does catch up with us and surpass us in most of these. We're pretty all right with that, though, for a couple of reasons. A, we know that it takes a long time to make progress at those upper levels.
Yes.
So, we're not too concerned that they caught us there. Um, the other reason that we're not too concerned about is that we're not concerned about it is keeping in mind we thought they were novices. So
Okay. Yeah.
we were trying to get them to intermediate. Like, we thought
Mhm.
that they were stuck and they needed our help getting to intermediate. Um, to get those advanced high score or intermediate high scores, you have to be able to handle to some degree advanced prompts. They had
Mhm.
never practiced those advanced prompts because we thought they weren't ready for them. So this test actually showed us, yep, they're ready for the advanced. It's time to give them more.
So is that what you have been doing?
Absolutely. And again, as a foreign language teacher who does not get a lot of outside feedback of their real results, this was the first time I had scientific data, real results to say, you're not giving them the things that they need, but you know what they need. I know by looking at this that they need advanced prompts, and I wasn't giving it to them. And that's unfortunate that I didn't give that to them last year. But without this test, I never would have known that. I
Right.
had no clue they were ready for it. And yeah, when you look at it, and I think this is the chart that just blew my mind as I
Okay.
was looking at the results. And by the way, this is a screenshot of the results page on the website. So this is my data from Apple.
Mm-hmm.
You can see that there are these ceilings in the output modes here, the listening and speaking and the writing, that my students were getting stuck at I4. It's like they couldn't break through that ceiling. But again, to break through that ceiling, you have to be able to handle advanced prompts. And some of my kids could because they're just geniuses, I guess. But it's not because I was giving them the right prompts. I was giving them prompts right here and seeing if they were able to handle it. Um, and when Apple gave them prompts here, it showed that very few of them were, it showed that many of them were ready for that, but only a few of them could actually handle it. So those were such great results to get.
I think so. It's like points for celebration and then a few points for reflection.
Absolutely. But for the first time, I could do a real reflection based off an outside analysis
Mm-hmm.
of an expert analysis. Again, it's AAPPL that's telling me this. So, I mean, that's really something.
So what does this mean for your students in your classroom in the future, besides more advanced prompts?
Right. So it means so many things for them. So yeah, they each got a score report back, right? It means
Mm-hmm.
that I use that data as the pre-assessment data the following year. My students who took Apple last year know where they started. They know what that means because of the score report. They know what they need to do next because of the rubrics that provide that prescriptive pathway.
Mm-hmm.
So they take a lot of ownership in this. They're able to set their own goals. What's nice about it, the seal of biliteracy kind of muddies this a little because seal of biliteracy says I5 or higher. Um, but Apple doesn't say that there's a failing or passing score. It's just what you are. It's all right if you score I2, and it's all right if you score I4. Those aren't failing grades. Into isn't a fail. It is just where you are. It only tells you what you're able to do, and there's no failing or passing. It's just what you can do, which is what proficiency is and
Mm-hmm.
what it should be about. So it's a very affirming test in that way. There's no
Yes.
failure. Um, but yeah, it's enabled my students to take a lot of ownership of their own language acquisition. And with the results that surprise, like I said, I was very surprised by the results, being convinced that they were stuck down here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I was scoring them all throughout the year. They kept getting in fours, in fours, in fours from me. And when they got their Apple results back and they were getting I4s,
Mm-hmm.
it was encouraging. And I have students who are not able to take French this year because of college courses or whatever it is they're doing, um,
Mm-hmm.
who have been getting tutored so that they can take the Apple test again. Because they want to see what they can do after another year, or they're finding different ways to take French classes. Because they want to do what they can do. So this is actually growing my program, and it's
Mm-hmm.
getting more kids speaking in foreign languages and more kids caring about their proficiency in a foreign language. So that is really exciting.
It is. It's great news, and I'm so glad you shared it with all of us. Um, and so your students, they can take this several times, the number of times they can take different pieces of it. So if they,
Absolutely.
yeah. So are they tending to do that? Let's say if they're going for the biliteracy seal and they don't do well in one mode and skill, they can just take that piece.
Absolutely. I have one student this year. He's a senior. As a junior, he passed. Excuse me, he didn't pass. He got an
Right.
I5 or higher
Yeah.
on 3 of the 4 parts, and he scored an I4 on presentational writing. So this year he has been journaling every day. He's been writing a lot, and yeah, he's ready to take this one section this year.
I think it's great too because it's communicating where the student's strengths and I don't want to say weaknesses, but you know, points for deltas for moving forward and improving. I wonder if many of our listeners have questions at this point, and I'm going to look here and see if there are any questions. One question is, are there any significant differences between the Apple and the Stamp 4S, which is a very similar type of test?
That's a good question. They are pretty similar. The big difference that I noticed that I cared about was the fact that it's ACTFL. I
Okay.
felt like that the ACTFL brand is so much more, it's so authoritative. So I really liked that. With Stamp, I didn't think their rubrics were quite as user friendly. And but I think one of the big differences, and I'm not too familiar with Stamp, is that the interpretive tests decide what kind of test they'll be taking for the listening and speaking and writing. So if you score in the novice range on reading and listening, you're not going to have a chance to show that you're above that in speaking or writing. It adapts to the test taker, the Stamp does.
Mm-hmm.
With Apple, it's the teacher who chooses which test the student should be taking.
So I know there's a Form A and a Form B. So how do you choose as the teacher?
Well, so you have to know your class, obviously, and you have to know the individual students. Since for me, the seal of biliteracy is only available for students who are able to score I5 or higher, and Form A only tests up to I4, then any student who's competing for the seal, um, we give Form B to. And any student who we're certain or feel pretty certain is novice high or higher, we give Form B to. If we know that there's no chance that this student is advanced, we give them Form A. So those are my level ones, my level twos, most of my level threes got Form A. And that might be another reason we're seeing a spike
Yeah.
here, is because that was the max. Actually, I just realized that. Thank you. Is because we're seeing a max for some of my level threes who could have overperformed. Um, but yeah, most of my level threes and under got Form A, just to see where in the intermediate or novice range I might place. If you think it's a student that is it's on the cusp of advanced or higher, then they want Form B.
Oh, that's very helpful. And here's another question. Do the students ever distract each other when they're doing these interpersonal conversations on the headsets?
Not so much. And I mean, I guess that's going to depend on the teacher and the classroom and all of that. But no, that wasn't an issue with us. Once headphones were on, we, they kind of zoned in. And the Apple test itself is kind of interactive. It simulates there being a person on the other end, and they're focused on that. They really didn't lose attention from that. And we did time it so everyone would start speaking at roughly the same time. So there was no conspicuous feeling of being the only one speaking.
Right. And I think that helps a lot to
It does.
promote their production. Looking at
Absolutely.
more of these questions, how long does it take to administer each of the sections of the apple?
Most of them take about 30 minutes, uh, which is what the website says. And that was pretty accurate. Obviously, especially for the reading, that we have some students that read more slowly than others. I'm not sure of this. Maybe someone else could answer it, but I believe Apple 2.0 actually has some uh, accommodations built in for students who receive accommodations. So
Mhm.
that's actually a new change, but they all pretty much take about 30 minutes, with the exception of the presentational writing. And especially in Form B, when they're asking those advanced prompts, it took far longer than 30 minutes, 1 to 2 hours for some of my students.
Mhm. I can imagine they want to do their very best, and if we're testing what they can do with the language, we have to give them that time.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to see what they can do. And you find that most of those students, they're slow writers in their first language. So yeah,
Good
we,
point.
we give them the time just like they have. And I will say alongside that, even though the presentational writing took a long time, you don't have to give them all at once. It's not like the ACT or SAT where there's this strict timeline that you have to follow. There's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of teacher ownership of the test or facilitator ownership. You can decide which part of the test is given when. The teacher can decide what order. Um, you can stop the test and resume it later. So when we ran out of time because of the presentational writing, it wasn't a big problem. We could just take it up again in the classroom the next day.
So you were doing this in your class time?
Not initially. We went on a 2-hour delay schedule and only tested the Apple takers in the morning. And so they received about 2 hours to test. And, by the time we distributed headphones and did all that, it was really only about an hour and a half. So they kind of had to do the writing on their own, most of them anyway. Or the writing ended up being in the classroom.
Because I've heard of people taking the whole day or taking a Saturday or doing it several days after school. And once again, like you said, it's up to the facilitator to decide what works best.
Absolutely. It can be adjusted to your school.
Okay, I'm checking for more questions. Do you have the students take the practice test or watch a demo before they take the test?
I did. I wanted them to see what it looked like. Because I knew that with so many students testing, I knew that the proctors weren't going to be very helpful because there were just too many proctors. We had art teachers and music teachers and chemistry teachers proctoring, and we knew that they weren't going to take the time to look through it. And, that's not to blame them. They're humans. They're busy. But we wanted our students to know what it looked like, how it was familiar. And there are the demos online that we had them take just so that it's not foreign to them, just so that we're seeing what they can really do instead of seeing them react to technology that they're unfamiliar with.
Oh, I like that. So when the students are talking to somebody who's feigning a conversation with them, I mean, who are they? Is it an avatar or is it an actual person?
It's a real person who kind of like nods their head as they go. And
Kind of like me right now, right?
exactly, yeah, it looks a lot like you. And they smile patiently at you. And yeah, no, there's a real person on the other end talking and asking questions.
This is my question because it just came to me, but do you plan to use the Apple to capture your students' growth and proficiency over the years?
Yes. Yeah, we're able to track their growth over the course of several years because we do require it at level 3 and up. So once they hit that level 3 mark, we've got them and we've got data on them and we can see what they're doing beyond that.
Thanks, Andy. Do you have anything else in your presentation that you want to share with me today?
That is a great question. um, I think just overall, the thing that I would like to show is, oops. Are you able to see the screen? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, is that I was able to actually get real useful information out of this. When I saw those I4 spikes on my results, like we already said, I realized that my upper levels weren't trying to get to intermediate mid. They were intermediate mid, and they needed push to advance. So that meant that legitimately, I needed to make that an advanced focused class and not an intermediate one. That completely changed how I ran that class. It changed the questions I asked. It changed the writing prompts I gave them. Everything changed when I realized I'm no longer pushing these students toward intermediate. I'm pushing them toward advanced. So that, just in terms of affecting my daily practice, that was huge. The other thing that was just so big for me, and as I'm talking to my more traditional colleagues who still want to teach that textbook grammar, we really learned that grammar was only a problem when it's a problem. The rubrics never talk about grammar. They don't say what they should know in terms of the past tense or direct object pronouns. That's not part of the rubric. The only thing the rubric says is it comprehensible by a native speaker or is it comprehensible by a sympathetic speaker? That's the only thing that matters. So as they're getting toward advanced, if a target language speaker could understand them without any problems, then the grammar's not a problem. The grammar's only a problem if it's a problem.
Right.
So
If they can't, manipulate the forms to express themselves adequately.
right. Yeah. And so if a student was very clearly talking about what happened yesterday and then changed the time frame to say what's happening today, but didn't do that with grammatical perfection, it didn't matter as long as the listener was able to understand with clarity what was going on. It was really amazing, and it was a great thing to show my traditional colleagues, to be like, oh, because you can actually see what the students wrote too. That's another advantage. You
Wow.
don't just see the score report; you see what they wrote, and you can listen to what they said. So I can look at my students who got I5s and A's on writing and say, that was a grammatically that was a grammatical disaster, but
Okay.
it was communicatively clear.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reason that they got that I5 or that A, was because the communication was not ambiguous, even though there were disasters in terms of form. Um, the message was clear. So yeah, that
Yeah.
was the takeaway, that grammar is only a problem when it's a problem.
Well, I'm thinking also that it's a learning experience not only for you, you're learning what your students are doing well or what they might need help in, but you're also learning how to use those rubrics better. If you're using those rubrics in your classroom regularly, then by looking at how the experts have scored some prompt and then comparing that with how you would have scored it, I think that's really helpful.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that we did as a department afterward, is we went through and we covered up the scores and we rated, and then we compared it to the ratings that they received from ACTFL. And so that was a really good exercise to go through as a group, and it's helped us to calibrate our own grading.
I think that's super important. And
Absolutely.
finally, what I like about this is it every assessment is really a learning experience for the student. So by giving an assessment like this, you're communicating to the students that you value them being able to express themselves in a way that is comprehensible to a native speaker rather than filling in a bubble.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, it's a very validating test. It's about, again, when we think of proficiency, it's what you can do. And that's what they're doing. That's what Apple allows them to do, is to show off what they can do in as non-threatening a way as possible.
Well, thank you, Jen and Andy. That was a fantastic session. We're going to make sure that we hang this on a website so that others who are interested in learning more about how you have used Apple in your classes, Andy, will have access to this. We're super excited to continue this webinar series later this month, and hope that everyone will join us again. Thank you.